Listen to me carefully. This is not a coincidence. This is not something you stumbled upon by accident. This is a moment arranged by God. And the reason your heart is beating a little faster right now is because your spirit recognizes a divine interruption. God is calling you out of the noise, out of the rush, out of the excuses. And God is saying, take 30 minutes with me right now, not later, not when you feel ready, not when life slows down, right now. Because heaven is attentive and God is ready to speak, ready to restore, ready to realign what has been drifting out of place in your life. So many people want God's power but refuse God's presence. They want answers without attention, breakthroughs without stillness, miracles without intimacy. But God does not shout over your distractions. God waits for your availability. And this is why the call is urgent. This is why it feels pressing. Because something in your life cannot move forward until you slow down long enough to hear God clearly. There are battles you are fighting with human strength that were never meant to be fought without divine instruction. There are decisions weighing on your mind that God has already prepared wisdom for. But wisdom is released in moments of surrender, not in moments of hurry. God is not asking for your entire day. God is not demanding your whole week. God is asking for 30 minutes. 30 minutes that can shift the direction of your life. 30 minutes that can break cycles you have struggled with for years. 30 minutes that can bring clarity where confusion has dominated. Do not underestimate what God can do in a short moment when your heart is fully yielded. History has changed because one person paused long enough to listen to God. Destinies have been rewritten because someone chose stillness over speed. You must understand something deeply. Busyness is not productivity in the eyes of God. Activity is not obedience. Many people fill their days with motion to avoid facing the silence where God speaks. But God is found in intentional stillness. When you stop running, stop striving, stop rehearsing your fears, that is when God's voice becomes clear. And God's voice does not come to condemn you. It comes to correct you, to comfort you, to call you higher than where you have been living. Right now, God is inviting you into alignment. Your soul has been pulled in too many directions. Your mind has been crowded with worries, deadlines, expectations, and disappointments. God sees the weight you have been carrying silently. God knows the prayers you stopped praying because you thought they were unanswered. God knows the tears you swallowed because you felt you had to stay strong. And God is saying, come, sit with me. Give me 30 minutes and let me remind you who you are and who I am. When you give God your attention, you give God permission. Permission to rearrange priorities. Permission to heal wounds you learned to hide. Permission to speak truth louder than fear. Many people say they trust God, but trust is revealed in time spent. You make time for what you value. You protect time for what matters. If God truly matters, then 30 minutes is not a sacrifice. It is an investment with eternal returns. Do not say you are too tired. God is the source of strength. Do not say you are too busy. God is the giver of time. Do not say you do not know how to pray. God is not looking for perfect words. God is looking for an open heart. Silence itself can be a prayer when it is offered with humility. Your breath can become worship. Your tears can become communication. God understands the language of the soul far better than rehearsed phrases. There is a reason God is calling you now and not tomorrow. Delay dulls sensitivity. The longer you postpone God, the easier it becomes to ignore God. But responsiveness sharpens spiritual hearing. When you respond quickly, you remain tender. When you hesitate, distractions multiply. Right now, God wants to realign your inner compass. You have been making decisions under pressure, reacting instead of discerning. 30 minutes with God can recalibrate your spirit and restore peace where anxiety has ruled. God does not compete with your schedule. God invites you to reorder it. When God becomes first, everything else finds its proper place. Many frustrations come not because God is absent, but because God has been placed last. You ask God to bless plans that were never surrendered. You ask God to fix outcomes without seeking direction. But God is patient and God is persistent. And this moment is evidence of that patience and persistence reaching out to you again. Think about how many times you have asked God for guidance. How many times you have said, God, show me what to do. This is how God shows you. By asking you to pause, by asking you to listen, by asking you to create space where divine wisdom can enter. God's guidance is not rushed. It flows in peace. It settles in quiet confidence. When God speaks, confusion lifts, even if circumstances remain the same. In these 30 minutes, God may not change everything around you, but God will begin changing everything within you. And when the inside shifts, the outside eventually follows. Strength returns, hope rises, faith becomes steady instead of fragile. You begin to see possibilities where you once saw walls. That is the power of communion with God. Not emotional excitement, but deep-rooted assurance that you are not alone and you are not directionless. You must understand that God is relational. God desires connection, not performance. God is not impressed by how busy you are. God is moved by your willingness to draw near. When you sit quietly with God, you are declaring trust. You are saying, I believe you are more important than my to-do list. I believe your voice matters more than my fears. That declaration shifts spiritual atmosphere. Some of you are standing at a crossroads, even if you have not admitted it out loud. A decision is approaching, a change is near, and God knows that without divine clarity, you may choose what feels urgent instead of what is right. That is why God is calling you now. 30 minutes can protect you from years of regret. 30 minutes can anchor you before the storm intensifies. 30 minutes can equip you with discernment that logic alone cannot provide. God is not distant. God is attentive. The moment you turn your heart toward God, heaven responds. You do not have to beg. You do not have to earn attention. God is already leaning toward you. The question is whether you will lean back, whether you will silence the notifications, step away from the noise, and honor this invitation. This is not about religion. This is about relationship with the one who formed you, knows you, and calls you by purpose, not by failure. When you spend time with God, you begin to see yourself differently. Shame loses its grip. Condemnation fades. You remember that you are created with intention, that your life is not random, that even your struggles are not wasted when surrendered. God redeems time. God restores what was lost. But restoration begins when you stop long enough to receive instruction. 30 minutes with God is not empty time. It is strategic time. It is time where burdens are exchanged for peace, where heaviness is replaced with hope, where fear is confronted by truth. You do not leave those moments the same way you entered them. Something shifts, sometimes subtly, sometimes powerfully, but always purposefully. God speaks in many ways, sometimes through a quiet inner conviction, sometimes through a sudden clarity that feels like light breaking through fog, sometimes through a deep peace that does not make sense logically. Do not limit how God communicates. Just be available. Availability is more powerful than eloquence. God can work with a willing heart far more than with impressive words. Right now, God is inviting you to reset. Reset your focus, reset your priorities, reset your faith. You have been running on emotional reserves, spiritual fatigue, and borrowed strength. God wants to replenish you directly, but replenishment requires rest in God's presence. Even the strongest become weak without renewal. Even the most faithful need moments of quiet communion. You are not weak for needing this moment. You are wise for responding to it. Strength is not found in constant motion. Strength is found in knowing when to stop and receive. God designed you with limits so that you would depend on divine power, not self-sufficiency. When you ignore those limits, exhaustion grows. When you honor them, grace flows. God is calling you to 30 minutes because something sacred happens when you prioritize the divine over the urgent. Life will always demand more. There will always be another task, another message, another responsibility. But moments with God do not repeat themselves the same way. Each invitation carries unique timing, unique purpose, unique grace. Missing it does not mean God abandons you, but receiving it accelerates what God wants to do through you. In these moments, God aligns your desires with divine will. You begin to want what is eternal, not just what is immediate. Your prayers shift from panic to trust, from control to surrender, from fear to faith. And that shift changes how you walk back into your daily life. You move differently, you speak differently, you respond differently, because you are no longer operating from emptiness, but from connection. God sees beyond what you can see. God knows what is ahead, and sometimes God calls you to pause because protection is needed before progress continues. Not every delay is an obstacle. Some delays are divine safeguards. 30 minutes of listening can save you from rushing into something that looks right but is not aligned. When you sit with God, you are reminded that you are guided, not alone, that you are seen, not forgotten, that your prayers are heard even when answers take time. God works in seasons, not in haste. But God also responds to attentiveness. When you show up, God shows you what you need for the next step. This moment is an invitation to deepen trust, to stop leaning solely on your understanding and open yourself to divine wisdom. God's perspective lifts you above temporary emotions and grounds you in lasting truth. And truth brings freedom, not freedom from responsibility, but freedom from fear, from confusion, from the weight of carrying everything alone. Take these 30 minutes seriously. Treat them as sacred ground. Because when you honor God's presence, God honors your obedience. Not with noise, not with spectacle, but with peace that steadies your soul and direction that clarifies your path. You were not meant to navigate life disconnected from your Creator. You were designed for communion. And every time you accept that design, life flows with greater purpose. 30 minutes is a doorway into renewed strength, sharpened discernment, and restored faith. God is patient, but God is also purposeful. And this call is purposeful. You do not need to understand everything. You only need to respond, sit, breathe, listen, speak honestly, let silence do its work, let faith rise quietly, let trust take root again. God is near to those who draw near, and in these moments, closeness changes everything. The weight you have been carrying does to disappear instantly, but it becomes lighter when carried with divine strength. The questions do not all vanish, but they lose their power to paralyze you. This is how lives are transformed, not always through dramatic events, but through consistent moments of surrender. 30 minutes at a time, attention offered, trust renewed, direction clarified, strength restored. God is waiting, not with anger, not with disappointment, but with open arms of grace and wisdom, ready to be poured into a willing heart. And as you give this time, something within you begins to settle, to awaken, to realign with the purpose that has always been there, waiting to be heard, waiting to be lived, waiting to be trusted in the quiet presence of God. There is a deeper reason God asks for your time before God releases instruction. Time with God reshapes your inner posture. It humbles pride, quiets arrogance, and softens resistance you did not realize had formed in your heart. Many people say they want direction, but what they truly want is confirmation of what they have already decided. God is not interested in being used as a stamp of approval. God desires to be honored as the source of wisdom. And wisdom only rests on hearts that are teachable, not hurried or defensive. When you slow yourself before God, you begin to recognize how much noise has been influencing your decisions. Opinions, comparisons, expectations, and fears speak loudly in the world. But God's voice is steady, not frantic. God does not pressure you the way fear does. God leads with peace, even when the path ahead requires courage. That peace is not passivity, it is assurance. It tells your spirit that even if the road is narrow, it is guided. God knows the season you are in. God knows whether you need to wait or move, release or hold, speak or remain silent. But you cannot discern seasons accurately when your soul is rushed. Time with God trains discernment. It sharpens your ability to distinguish between urgency and importance, between emotional impulse and divine prompting. That discernment becomes a shield against regret. Some of you have been asking God for signs, but God has been asking you for stillness. Signs are not substitutes for relationship. When you know God's voice, you do not need constant confirmation. You walk with confidence rooted in trust, not in visible proof. 30 minutes with God strengthens that trust. It deepens familiarity. Over time, you begin to recognize divine guidance not as something dramatic, but as something natural, steady, and reliable. God is not intimidated by your questions. God welcomes honest wrestling far more than silent distance. In these moments of quiet attention, you can bring doubts without fear. You can bring disappointment without shame. God does not withdraw because you are uncertain. God draws closer when you are sincere. Sincerity opens doors that performance never will. There are truths God wants to remind you of that have been buried under self-criticism and past failure. God does not define you by what you did wrong, but by what you were created to become. Time with God recenters your identity. It pulls you out of labels placed on you by people, circumstances, or your own mistakes. When God speaks identity, courage follows. God is also calling you to these moments because endurance is built in presence, not in pressure. You have been pushing yourself, trying to hold everything together, wondering why joy feels distant. Joy is not manufactured by effort. It is restored by connection. When you draw near to God, your spirit begins to remember what hope feels like without strain. 30 minutes with God is an act of trust in a world that celebrates self-reliance. It is a declaration that you do not have to control everything to be safe. God's sovereignty does not remove responsibility, but it removes the illusion that everything depends on you. That realization lifts a burden many carry without words. God's guidance often comes as alignment rather than instruction. You may not hear a list of steps, but you will sense direction. Your thoughts settle, your priorities clarify. Your next action becomes evident without force. That is how God leads when you listen deeply, not by overwhelming, but by ordering what was scattered. Some of you have been feeling restless without understanding why. That restlessness is not dissatisfaction with life, it is hunger for depth. God placed eternity within the human spirit, and no amount of activity can satisfy what only divine connection fulfills. When you ignore that hunger, it shows up as anxiety or frustration. When you honor it, it becomes peace with purpose. God is also preparing you for responsibility you cannot yet see. Before God expands influence, God strengthens foundations. Time spent in humility protects you when opportunities grow. Character is formed quietly long before it is tested publicly. 30 minutes now can prepare you for moments later that demand wisdom, restraint, and courage. God is not rushed by outcomes, but God is intentional with Him. This moment is timely, not because you are perfect, but because you are available. Availability invites grace. Grace empowers obedience. Obedience opens doors that effort alone cannot unlock. When you leave these moments with God, you carry something invisible but powerful back into your daily interactions. Your words become steadier, your reactions soften, your decisions reflect clarity rather than impulse. People may not know what has changed, but they will sense peace where tension once lived. God does not require eloquence. God responds to sincerity. Even when your mind wanders, return gently. Even when silence feels uncomfortable, remain. Growth often happens beneath the surface before you feel it. Roots deepen before fruit appears. Trust the process. God is inviting you into. This invitation is not about escaping responsibility. It is about facing it with wisdom. It is not about withdrawing from life. It is about engaging life aligned with divine purpose. God does not pull you away to isolate you, but to prepare you to return strengthened. As you continue to give God these moments, you will notice a quiet confidence replacing self-doubt. Not arrogance, but assurance. Assurance that you are guided. Assurance that you are held. Assurance that even when answers unfold gradually, God remains constant. God's presence recalibrates desire. What once felt urgent may lose its grip. What once seemed insignificant may gain meaning. Perspective shifts when you see life through the lens of eternity rather than immediacy. God is inviting you not just to listen, but to respond inwardly, to let truth reshape thought patterns, to let peace displace fear, to let trust over ID control. These internal shifts are the foundation of lasting transformation. And as these moments accumulate, 30 minutes at a time, you begin to walk differently through the world, aware that guidance is not distant, that wisdom is accessible, that strength is renewable, that God is near in every step, in every pause, in every breath that follows as you continue to open your heart and remain attentive to the quiet, steady leading of God. There is a sacred discipline formed when you consistently answer God's call to pause. It teaches your heart obedience before understanding. Many want clarity first and obedience later, but God often works in the opposite order. When you honor God without demanding immediate explanation, trust matures. And mature trust is unshaken by uncertainty. It stands firm even when outcomes are not yet visible. God shapes perception in these moments. You begin to see beyond surface appearances and temporary setbacks. What once looked like failure may reveal itself as redirection. What once felt like loss may show itself as protection. Time with God reframes your narrative. You stop interpreting life only through pain or pressure and begin interpreting it through purpose. God is not limited by your past patterns. Habits that feel ingrained, cycles that seem permanent, mindsets that feel immovable. None of these intimidate God, but transformation begins with awareness, and awareness grows in stillness. When you sit with God, hidden motives surface gently, not to shame you, but to free you. God exposes only what God intends to heal. There is also authority that rises from quiet obedience, not loud dominance, but spiritual weight. When you instantly listen, your life carries credibility. Your words gain depth. Your actions carry intention. People sense alignment even if they cannot name it. That alignment is the fruit of private moments with God that shape public strength. God does not merely inform, God forms. Instruction without formation produces shallow faith. Formation happens slowly, patiently, through repeated encounters with truth. 30 minutes becomes a workshop where God molds character, not just choices. Integrity deepens, patience strengthens, humility anchors ambition. Some of you have been struggling with inconsistency, feeling close one moment and distant the next. Consistency is not born from intensity, it is built through rhythm. God is inviting you into a rhythm of presence, not perfection, but return. Each time you return, you reinforce connection. Each return weakens distance. God's guidance is often confirmed through peace rather than excitement. Excitement fades quickly. Peace remains steady. When you sit with God, learn to value calm assurance over emotional highs. That calm becomes an anchor when storms arise. You will recognize direction not because it feels thrilling, but because it feels right at the deepest level of your being. God is also refining how you wait. Waiting with God is not passive. It is active trust. It is preparation without anxiety. It is movement beneath stillness. While you wait, God strengthens resolve, purifies intention, and aligns desire. When movement comes, you move without hesitation because confidence has been cultivated. There is a humility that grows when you realize how much clarity comes simply from listening. You stop assuming you already know. You stop forcing outcomes. You stop reacting out of fear. God's wisdom replaces impulse with intention. That wisdom guards you from unnecessary conflict and wasted energy. God is teaching you to distinguish between what is loud and what is true. The world rewards volume, speed, and visibility. God values depth, faithfulness, and discernment. When you learn to prioritize God's voice, you are less swayed by pressure and more grounded in purpose. Time with God also restores compassion. When stress hardens the heart, empathy fades. But when you sit in God's presence, your heart softens again. You remember that people are complex, that struggles are often hidden, that grace is powerful. This compassion does not weaken you, it strengthens relationships and deepens understanding. God is inviting you to trust divine timing over personal urgency. Urgency often leads to compromise. Timing leads to fulfillment. When you align with God's timing, you move with confidence rather than desperation. You act decisively without rushing. You speak clearly without aggression. As you continue to honor these moments, you will notice resilience growing quietly. Setbacks will no longer derail you. Criticism will not define you. Praise will not inflate you. Balance emerges when identity is rooted in God rather than circumstance. God is patient with growth. Do not measure progress by dramatic change. Measure it by increased peace, clearer judgment, steadier faith. These are signs of deep transformation. Roots strengthen unseen long before branches expand. God is inviting you to live from a centered place, a place where decisions flow from conviction, not comparison, where confidence is anchored, oared in trust, not control. That center is cultivated in silence, nourished by attention, sustained by obedience. And as you continue to respond, 30 minutes at a time, something profound unfolds within you. Awareness sharpens, purpose clarifies, strength renews, and without striving, without noise, without force, your life begins to reflect the quiet authority, steady peace, and enduring guidance that flow from a heart consistently aligned with God. There is a refining fire in quiet obedience that cannot be found in public moments. When no one sees you listening, when no one applauds your stillness, God shapes sincerity. This is where motives are purified. This is where faith becomes real, not performative. God is not impressed by outward display. God is attentive to inward posture. What you become in hidden moments determines how you stand in visible ones. God teaches you restraint in these moments. Restraint of speech, restraint of reaction, restraint of ego. Not every thought must be spoken. Not every impulse must be acted upon. Wisdom grows when you learn to pause before responding. God trains you to move from reaction to reflection, from impulse to intention. That restraint is strength under control, and it protects you from damage you would otherwise create without realizing it. God also awakens gratitude when you slow down. Gratitude shifts focus from what is missing to what has been sustained. You begin to notice provision that once felt ordinary. Breath, clarity, opportunity, resilience. Gratitude is not denial of hardship, it is recognition of grace within it. And gratitude fuels trust. A thankful heart is less anxious about tomorrow because it remembers faithfulness from yesterday. There are burdens you carry that were never assigned to you, expectations placed by others, pressures rooted in comparison, standards formed by fear. When you sit with God, these false weights begin to fall away. God does not drive you with guilt. God leads you with purpose. Purpose liberates you from trying to be everything to everyone and anchors you in being faithful where you are. God's truth has a way of simplifying what you have overcomplicated. The mind spirals, but truth centers. When you listen deeply, confusion loses its authority. You may still face complexity, but you face it with clarity. God does not promise ease, but God provides steadiness. Steadiness allows you to walk through uncertainty without losing yourself. God is also cultivating courage in these moments. Not loud courage, but quiet resolve. Courage that does not announce itself, but stands firm when tested. Courage that chooses integrity, even when compromise seems easier. That courage is born when you know you are guided. Fear weakens when trust strengthens. And trust grows through time given willingly. You begin to realize that obedience is not loss, it is alignment. It does not shrink your life, it focuses it. When you align with God, energy stops leaking into distractions that do not serve purpose. Focus sharpens, direction stabilizes. You move forward without fragmentation. God also speaks restoration over parts of you that have grown weary. Emotional exhaustion does not disappear overnight, but renewal begins. God replenishes gently, not forcefully. Strength returns in layers. Peace settles gradually. Healing unfolds patiently. These moments are not escapes from reality. They are preparations to face reality with renewed capacity. There is wisdom God entrusts only to those who listen consistently, not because God withholds, but because readiness matters. Wisdom requires humility to receive and discipline to apply. Time with God grows both. You learn not only what to do, but when and how. Timing becomes as important as action. God teaches you to trust silence. Silence is not absence, it is space. Space where insight forms. Space where conviction settles. Space where truth rises without competition. In silence, you learn that God's presence is not dependent on sound or sensation. It is steady, constant, reliable. As you continue, you will notice that your inner dialogue changes. Harsh self-criticism softens. Anxiety-driven thoughts lose dominance. Perspective widens. God's truth begins to interrupt old narratives that once controlled you. These interruptions are not loud, but they are powerful. They reshape belief over time. God is patient with process. Do not rush what is forming. What grows slowly grows strong. What is built deeply endures pressure. These moments are not wasted, they are foundational. Foundations are rarely seen, but they carry everything that follows. You are being taught to live from conviction rather than emotion. Emotions fluctuate. Conviction anchors. Conviction steadies you when feelings shift. It keeps you faithful when motivation fades. Conviction is formed when truth is revisited, absorbed, and lived out quietly. God is calling you into a life of attentiveness. Attentiveness to direction. Attentiveness to correction. Attentiveness to grace. This attentiveness sharpens spiritual awareness and grows daily decisions. It keeps you responsive rather than reactive. And as this rhythm continues, something profound deepens within you. Confidence without arrogance, peace without passivity, strength without strain. You carry yourself differently, not because circumstances changed, but because alignment did. You walk forward aware that guidance is near, wisdom is accessible, strength is renewed, and purpose unfolds steadily as you remain present, receptive, and anchored in ongoing communion with God. Now hear this with your whole heart. This moment is not passing by you lightly. It is pressing on you because God is calling you higher. God is asking you to stop living on the surface and step into depth, to stop surviving on habit and begin living with intention, to stop delaying what you know must change. God is not calling you to guilt or fear, but to awakening, to awareness, to renewal that begins the instant you choose to respond. Examine your life honestly in the light of God's presence, not with condemnation, but with courage. Look at where your attention has been divided, where your heart has grown tired, where trust has weakened. God already sees it all and still calls you closer. That is not rejection, that is mercy. God does not expose to shame you, but to restore you. What you bring into the light loses its power to control you. Let this be the moment you realign, where you stop negotiating with distractions and start honoring what truly matters, where you choose depth over comfort, obedience over convenience, stillness over noise. God is worthy of your attention, not because God demands it, but because your life flourishes when God is first. When God is centered, everything else finds order. Do not leave this moment unchanged. Do not return to routine without resolve. Carry this call with you as a sacred responsibility. Make space for God not as an obligation, but as a lifeline. Let your days be shaped by divine guidance rather than pressure. Let your decisions be rooted in trust rather than fear. Let your strength come from communion rather than exhaustion. God is nearer than you think. Guidance is closer than confusion. Peace is more accessible than anxiety. But closeness requires response. So choose to draw near. Choose to listen, choose to walk deliberately, humbly, faithfully with God. Let your life become a reflection of alignment, a testimony of trust, a quiet strength that speaks without force. And as you step forward, remember this: you are not empty, you are not forgotten, you are not without direction. You are called, guided, sustained by God. Walk with awareness, live with purpose, remain attentive, and let the depth you cultivate in God's presence shape the way you move, speak, decide, and endure until your life itself becomes a living expression of trust, reverence, and unwavering devotion to God.